Worship at CFNI is, it seems like it's always exploding into something new. This morning, for example, before we even started into worship started, if that makes any sense. We hadn't even gotten to the first song, and the students just began pouring out worship. It was like you couldn't turn it off if you wanted to. And as a worship leader, that is one of the most gratifying experiences, is when I'm not the one that's leading it anymore. I'm just a part of what's happening.
When Christ for the Nations was founded by Gordon and Frida Lindsay, they made it a point for every morning, every day of the week, for the students to come in and to worship corporately from 8 to 8:30, 8:35. And so over the course of 40 years, over the course of the life of this school, we've continued to do that, and we haven't wavered from that. We've always done that.
Well, I came to CFNI in the fall of 1973, and that was just after Gordon Lindsay had passed away the previous April. And when I came here, actually I came to visit this in the summer, and I found there was such a wonderful presence of the Lord, and freedom in worship. I mean, people could express themselves in worship, and I felt very much at home in that environment. And so I was invited by Ms. Lindsay to stay and play for a conference that they had that summer. They called it the seminar. And so I had a chance to play for the worship that week, and I really felt this was a place for me. So I made a decision really quickly to go back home, move out here, and come start to school that fall. There were not very many piano players at that time, and so I ended up playing for a lot of the chapels that year and all the services, everything that was going on. And God changed my life that year. There was so much singing and praising, and the songs were simple in those days. Anybody could make up a song, and we'd hear songs from other sources, and we'd sing them over and over and over and over. A lot of them were songs that were just scriptures set to music, and that was a wonderful wealth of the Word coming into our hearts.
Here, one of the interesting things, or really cool things, aspects about being at a school, is that you're around all these students that they're here for 4 to 6 semesters. Some of them come in with a real basic knowledge of their Christianity. Some come in, having been pastors before. So you have these varying states of understanding when it comes to God's character. But all of them move in the same direction when it comes to the revelation, because when God is moving on the campus, He's moving in the classes and the classrooms and in their own private worship times, and we get together in the morning for these chapel services and worship. There's this exponential growth of revelation. And here, since it's like there's this open heaven. I mean, we've been doing this for 40 years. I'm so privileged to just have, feel like I just stepped onto a fast-moving train.
And we've seen people's heart changing, and it's evident that our hearts are changing. We are being transformed through the songs that we sing to God. And that's because we're not just merely singing the songs, but we are singing with whole heart and just desiring God's presence in the midst.
For me to develop and grow and have an understanding of what it is about worship, I would have not known that if I wasn't here. And so being involved with the worship teams, with the leaders that I had here, has totally changed me. And I feel like because of that, now I'm able to teach that to students here daily. Just everything that I've learned from my experience here at CFNI, I'm able to teach that to students, what to watch out for, what to be aware of, so that they won't carry this when they're done at CFNI. And I feel like now we're building up leaders here at the school so that when they leave and they go back to their churches or they go out and minister, they're able to teach others about the presence of God and what it means.
It's great if I can teach someone to be, if I can be a good leader and raise someone up, and then they go from Christ for the Nations and they're a good leader somewhere else. But if that leadership hasn't continued and they haven't spawned themselves leadership-wise into the group around them and the oikos that they move on to next, their own realm of influence, then then really what's the point? Because one of the primary goals of Christ for the Nation is legacy. Christ for the Nations has carried on for over 40 years now because of legacy, because people pass on their realm of influence onto the next, onto the next, onto the next. So when students leave Christ for the Nations, I want them to be powerful lovers, passionate lovers of God, sensitive to His presence, strong, capable worship leaders who can lead whether they're on a street corner or on a platform. And also that they can reproduce that same gifting in others and see it raised up like mothers and fathers in the Spirit.
In the name of Jesus. Amen. All right, Lord,
There was no industry around praise and worship music in those days. There were gospel songs and churches were singing, but it was just kind of the beginning of a new kind of expression. But as songs began to come forth from the students, and we would sing them, and God's anointing was on them, and they'd get on our recording. And from the earliest days, almost the first, second or third year at CFNI, an annual recording was made, a very impromptu, spontaneous kind of thing. We just record a chapel as it was in the beginning, and some of those tapes, these new songs would be heard, and they would go around the world. CFNI wasn't selling tapes in those days. They would send them out for a small donation, or maybe even free, to missionaries or wherever.
Spontaneous songs sometimes rise up within a few voices in the choir, and it ends up leading the entire congregation. And sometimes we go into presence of God with new song, entirely new song that is created at the moment. And we can see that's transforming our hearts, and it's shifting the paradigm of the worship. And we can feel that we are seeing the presence of God that is ministered through a choir. And although all of us have unique character and unique skills, and we all come from different backgrounds and different denominations and different nations, but we know when we come together, we are one body of Christ.
When you're dealing with a recording, there's so many things that you got to take into consideration and you got to look at. And I mean, as an organization who has tons of people, we get tons of stuff coming in, tons of songs to choose from, so that's a process in itself. And then you got students. We have probably all over campus, I'd say we may have maybe over 100 musicians, and you got to narrow it down to see who's actually going to be on the recording, and what elements do they bring to the table that we need for this particular recording. So then that's another process, picking the musicians. And then you got all the administration, all of the scheduling, practice times around people's work schedules. It's just on and on. There's so many practical things that you have to prepare for and stuff before you actually get into the recording.
It's number one, it's finding the pulse of the Spirit. Number two, finding the songs that best replicate and communicate that. Then it's finding the students that we feel will best represent that sound and that particular theme, as well as the DNA of the school at that time. And then it's finding the maps for the songs and making those cemented and very comfortable. And then the practices and the rehearsals until it's just done. And then the songs just pour out of them. That's the goal, at least. Not so that we get stuck in a rut of how that song should be played, but that we're so comfortable with the chord changes and the melodies and the lead lines and the vocal parts. We're so comfortable with it that by the time worship does happen live on stage and the Spirit is moving, we're totally just reflexively worshiping through that song because we know it so well. Really, the heart of it hasn't changed. That's been the same since its inception. And it's to capture what the Lord is doing right now in the season at Christ for the Nations with the student body. What songs are they writing? What in dreams and in visions and prayer closet times? What is He speaking to the students? That kind of stuff. Those are the ingredients that are being poured into our songs. And so when you get an annual recording, whenever you see the latest recording for Christ for the Nations, you can rest assured that that's what God's doing in the student body at that time.
We stand on this firm foundation and this rich soil of healings and miracles. And so really that's our prayer, and that's our heart, is that it be more than just good songs or more than just fun to watch, but it be something that really transcends even sound waves and really begins to touch you even where you're at.
The summer, and I found there was such a wonderful presence of the Lord, and freedom in worship. I mean, people could express themselves in worship, and I felt very much at home in that environment. And so I was invited by Ms. Lindsay to stay and play for a conference that they had that summer. They called it the seminar.
The first song, and the students just began pouring out worship. It was like you couldn't turn it off if you wanted to. And as a worship leader, that is one of the most gratifying experiences, is when I'm not the one that's leading it anymore. I'm just a part of what's happening.
When Christ for the Nations was founded by Gordon and Frida Lindsay, they made it a point for every morning, every day of the week, for the students to come in and to worship corporately from 8 to 8:30, 8:35. And so over the course of 40 years, over the course of the life of this school, we've continued to do that, and we haven't wavered from that. We've always done that.
Well, I came to CFNI in the fall of 1973, and that was just after Gordon Lindsay had passed away the previous April. And when I came here, actually I came to visit this in
Worship at CFNI is, it seems like it's always exploding into something new. This morning, for example, before we even started at worship started, if that makes any sense. We hadn't even gotten